Stonecross, Texas. The kind of place where gossip traveled faster than bullets and silence spoke louder than screams. It was Sunday morning, and the town's finest were gathering in their stiff collars and long dresses, preparing to hear the word of God. But before a single hymn could be sung, a different kind of ritual unfolded in the sun-baked square. Mira knelt in the dirt with her wrists bound and her head bowed low. Her brown skin shimmered with sweat. Her dark braid clung to her back like a whip. The ground was dry and cracked beneath her knees, but she didn't flinch, not when Mrs. Hargrave shouted, not when the sheriff pulled her up by the arm, not even when the accusations began raining down like hailstones. "She took my silver brooch," Mrs. Hargrave barked, pointing a manicured finger. "I trusted her in my home. She's always looked shifty to me," someone murmured. "She's one of them mixed breeds. Probably got Indian blood." Another spat. Mira didn't speak. She knew her words wouldn't matter. She'd been working for the Hargrave family for nearly 2 years, scrubbing floors, hauling laundry, sleeping on a straw mat in the attic. They called her girl. Even though she was 20, they called her lucky to have a roof. But not once had they looked her in the eye as an equal. The sheriff, a stout man with sweat staining his collar, made a show of removing his hat. "Miss Hargrave, do you want to press charges?" "I want justice," she replied. Justice in Stonecross came without a trial. The sheriff nodded to 2 deputies. They dragged Mira to the church steps. The bell had just begun to ring. She looked up at it, that spotless white cross glowing against the sky, and wondered if heaven could see her. A crowd gathered. Children stared. Mothers clutched their sons' shoulders. Men muttered about setting an example. Then came it cracked through the air and struck her back once, twice, again. Her dress tore. Blood welled up. Her body jerked. But she didn't cry out, not once. She bit down until her lips bled. Her eyes locked on the church door. The pastor stood in the threshold. He looked at her, then at the crowd, then lowered his head and walked back inside. By the time the lash fell a 10th time, Mira could no longer sit upright. They cut the rope and she collapsed, a heap of torn cloth and broken breath on the church's front yard. "Let that be a lesson," the sheriff said, brushing off his hands. The townsfolk scattered. Church service began. Hymns filled the air, and Mira was left behind, discarded like trash in the noonday heat. The dust clung to her skin, her lips cracked, her back pulsed with pain. But her heart was louder than the whip, and though no one heard it, it whispered one word, again and again: endure. The road leading into Stonecross shimmered under the merciless afternoon sun. Dust rose in lazy clouds as a lone rider approached, his silhouette stretching long over the dirt trail. From a distance he looked like a shadow torn from the earth, his mount a great black stallion that moved with eerie silence. Kael didn't belong to any town, not anymore. His name was whispered in saloons and army tents, always with the same tone, part fear, part legend. They said he was a ghost from the Apache wars. They said he had murdered a colonel in his sleep. They said he walked the desert not to escape, but to punish it. But Kael wasn't chasing ghosts. Not that day. He had passed the wooden sign for Stonecross without even glancing at it. His eyes, dark and narrow, were drawn toward the heart of town. The scent of blood and shame still hung in the air. As he entered the square, conversations faltered. Men on porches fell silent. Mothers pulled their children indoors. Even the horses tied outside the saloon grew restless. Then he saw her. Mira lay crumpled in the dust like a discarded doll. Her back was raw, the skin torn open in stripes. Her face, turned sideways, was barely visible under her tangled braid. She was still conscious, barely, her breath shallow, her fingers twitching. Kael slowed his horse and dismounted without a word. The sound of his boots on the dirt was the only noise in the square. A man near the general store tried to speak. Hey now, friend. You can't just..." Kael didn't answer. He kneeled, belied the broken woman, his eyes scanning her injuries. Gently, he placed 2 fingers on her throat, then brushed the hair from her face. Something shifted in his jaw. Not pity, not anger. Something deeper. Recognition. He lifted her in his arms. The crowd stirred. People moved forward, unsure whether to intervene. "She's not yours," someone called out. Kael turned his head slowly, fixing his gaze on the voice. The man stepped back, hands raised. "She's dying," Kael said, his voice rough as gravel but quiet as wind. "That's not your concern," barked the sheriff, now appearing at the edge of the steps, hand resting on his holster. Kael didn't flinch. "Then whose is it?" No one answered. Mira stirred faintly in his arms. Her eyelids fluttered. and for the briefest second her gaze met his. She didn't speak, didn't have the strength, but she didn't look away. He mounted his horse with her across his lap. The stallion shifted under their weight, then turned without command and began to walk. No one followed. No one dared. From the saloon window, a man whispered, "That's Kael, the Apache, the one with the bounty," another asked. $100, dead or alive, more if he's brought in quiet. They say he killed a white woman. They say he loved her. As the horse disappeared into the trees, the town slowly exhaled. Mrs. Hargrave, pale with fury, turned to the sheriff. "You let that savage take her, that criminal. He just rode off with her like she was nothing." "She was already nothing," the sheriff muttered, but his voice was weak. Somewhere deep in the trees, Kael rode in silence. Mira's blood soaked into his shirt. She trembled against him. Still, he didn't stop. He rode until Stonecross was nothing but a memory behind him, and the desert ahead offered no promise of peace, only the chance for something other than death. The trail Kael followed was not marked on any map. It twisted through dry canyons, under thorned branches, over hills where only coyotes dared call home. By the time the sun dipped low, its final rays clung to the horizon like dying embers, casting long shadows over the land. He rode without speaking. Mira, limp in his arms, had not stirred since they left the town. Her breath was shallow. Blood had dried into a stiff crust across her back and soaked into his buckskin shirt. He shifted her weight slightly, careful not to wake the pain, and pushed. As dusk settled, the desert turned cold. The wind picked up and whistled through rocks like a warning. Kael turned off the path and led his horse toward the base of mesa. There, tucked between two outcrops, was a small cave barely large enough for a man to stand. He dismounted and laid Mira down on a folded blanket. He didn't light a fire. Fire brought eyes. Instead, he worked in the dark, cleaning her wounds with water from a goatskin flask. She flinched with each touch but did not wake. Kael knew the art of pain. He'd learned it young, from the army, from betrayal, from watching his people starve while treaties turned to ash. But this girl, beaten not in war but in peace, had endured something even he hadn't. The cruelty of those who call themselves civilized. She murmured something in her sleep. A name, maybe, or a prayer. He paused, the cloth soaked red in his hand. He whispered a word in Apache, soft like a lullaby, then bound her back with a clean wrap torn from his own shirt. The night passed slowly. Mira awoke to a sliver of dawn light painting the cave wall. Her body ached from the inside out, but it was the silence that startled her most. No voices, no footfalls, only breath, steady and near. She turned her head slightly. Kael sat at the entrance, legs crossed, knife on his lap, watching the landscape as if waiting for the world to end. She tried to sit up but gasped. The pain surged like fire under her skin. He turned. "Don't move." His voice was rough but not unkind. She blinked, disoriented. "Where are we?" she managed. "Safe for now. You shouldn't have taken me." He shrugged. "No one else would." Mira wanted to argue but the words failed. He handed her a canteen. She drank greedily, water trailing down her chin. When she handed it back, her fingers brushed his. They both froze. "You didn't ask me," she whispered. "No," he said. "I didn't." "Why?" He looked at her long and hard. "Because you were dying." She didn't reply. She simply lay back down, her eyes fixed on the stone ceiling. In that silence, something settled between them. Not forgiveness, not trust, but a ceasefire born of shared loneliness. By the third day, she was walking, slowly, leaning on the cave walls. Kael brought food, roots, berries, a lizard once. He never asked her about the town. She never asked him why he'd been there. But in the way he watched the horizon, the way his hand always hovered near his knife, Mira knew one thing. They were both running. That night, as they sat in the growing dark, she spoke again. "My mother was Yaqui from Sonora. They called her a witch." Kael didn't turn his head. "They call everything they fear a curse. She died in a mission. I was 7. He nodded once. "And you?" she asked. He didn't answer. Not that night. But in the morning, before the sun climbed, she found a small bundle outside the cave. A necklace made of bone beads and sinew placed gently where she could see it. It wasn't an apology. It was something older than words. Mira dreamt of the mission again. Stone walls painted white, tall crosses looming over, fields of agave, and the distant hum of nuns whispering prayers through cracked lips. She saw her mother kneeling at the altar, her dark hair braided with red thread, her back turned. A man's voice shouted, a scream. Then the image dissolved in smoke, and Mira awoke with tears on her cheeks. The desert air was dry and sharp, but the cave was warm from the morning sun. Kael was gone. Again, she rose carefully, her back stiff but healing. Her hands still trembled, though she wasn't sure if it was from pain or the fear that always followed her dreams. She stepped outside, blinking in the light. The land stretched endlessly, red earth, jagged stone, and skies so wide they felt like judgment. Kael returned near midday, carrying a bundle wrapped in cloth. He handed it to her without ceremony. Inside, smoked rabbit, cornmeal cakes, and a worn piece of cloth for dressing. "You didn't have to," she said. "I know." They ate in silence, perched on a fallen log near the cave. She watched him closely, the way he moved, slow and deliberate, always aware of his surroundings. He didn't fidget, didn't fill the quiet with words like men in town did. His stillness was louder than their noise. After the meal, she asked, "Why were you in Stonecross?" He didn't answer at first. His gaze drifted to the herb, but then he spoke. "I heard they were holding land auctions. I had family buried near there. I went to see if anything remained." "Did it?" He shook his head. "Just fences." She stared at her hands. "They burned my mother's thing, said they were pagan. All she had was a pouch of herbs and a song she used to sing." "What song?" "I don't remember. Just the way she hummed, like wind through dry leaves." Kael closed his eyes as if he could hear it. After a moment he said, "My wife used to sing too, when our daughter cried." Mira's breath caught. She hadn't expected tenderness from a man whose face seemed carved from stone. "What happened to them?" she asked softly. His jaw tensed. "Soldiers came to cleanse the territory. They promised peace. My wife believed them. She told me to give up the fight." "And did you?" He nodded. "For a while, we built a home near a white settlement. Our daughter was 4. He paused. The silence stretched long. Mira didn't push. "She died during a raid. The same men who gave us treaties. I was out hunting. When I returned, he didn't finish." Mira reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. His fingers were rough, calloused, but warm. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He opened his eyes. "I've never told anyone that story." She looked at him, truly looked, and saw more than the outlaw, the fugitive, the Apache warrior. She saw a man stitched together by loss. "I don't belong anywhere," she said. He met her gaze. "Neither do I." That night they sat by a small fire Kael dared to build, hidden by the cave's shadow. Mira hummed a melody she barely remembered, a soft tune her mother once sang. Kael closed his eyes listening. For the first time since Stonecross, she felt something shift inside her, not safety but presence, like her soul had been wandering, and now, someone saw it. The days blurred into each other, marked only by the rising and falling of the sun, the ache in Mira's back, and the sound of Kael's boots brushing through sand. Their refuge became a rhythm, quiet, necessary, fragile. They lived off roots, rabbit and silence, but the land, like their wounds, never stayed still for long. One afternoon the sky shifted. Clouds rolled in from the west like smoke from a battlefield. Kael squinted toward the horizon and muttered something in his native tongue. Mira, sitting on a flat stone braiding her hair, looked up. "What did you say?" "Rain." She tilted her head. "I've never seen rain in the desert." "You'll hear it first," he said, then stood. "We need shelter." They packed quickly. Kael led her through a narrow pass, up a slope of red stone to a higher cavern, deeper than the one they had shared before, with walls that swallowed sound and air that smelled of old fire. Just as they reached its mouth, thunder cracked like a whip overhead. Mira flinched. The memory of the square surged back. The sheriff's voice, the snapping sound, the laughter of the townsfolk. She pressed a hand to her chest. Kael looked at her, eyes searching. "You're safe." "I know," she said, but her voice was too tight to believe it. The rain came hard. Fat drops slammed the earth, turning dust to steam. The wind howled through the rocks, bringing with it the scent of wet sage and distant lightning. Inside the cave they sat in silence watching the storm. The fire they built was small, but its warmth filled the narrow space between them. Mira spoke first. "I used to believe God was watching, that he cared." Kael didn't move, but when they tied me up in front of the church, he was quiet, she said. "Maybe he was never listening at all." Kael stared into the flames. "My people say the Creator doesn't speak. He shows." She turned toward him. "Shows what?" "Pain, death, and the choice to keep living." She let that settle between them, like a stone in water. "I used to think suffering made people stronger," she said, "but now, I just feel hollow. Kael finally looked at her. Hollow things can be filled. Her eyes welled, not with sorrow but with something older. Grief, yes, but also recognition. Outside, the storm deepened. Rain slapped the stone like drums. Inside, the fire crackled, low and steady. She reached toward him, not bold but steady. Her fingers brushed the scar on his jaw. He didn't flinch. "Why did you save me?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. His breath was slow. Then, "Because you didn't cry out." She blinked. "I've seen many beaten," he said. "Men, women, children, all screamed. But you stayed silent." She swallowed. "I wanted to, but I couldn't afford to." "I know." Mira leaned closer. The fire flickered across her face, casting gold in her eyes. "And now?" she asked. Kael reached out, one calloused hand, uncertain but firm, and cupped her cheek. His thumb brushed the corner of her mouth. The gesture was not a kiss, not yet, but it held more weight than anything spoken. "Now," he said, "you don't have to be alone." The cave echoed with wind, not words, and outside the storm raged on, washing the desert clean, even if just for a moment. The storm passed, but the quiet that followed was not peace. It was warning. Kael had grown more restless. His eyes darted to the hills with increasing frequency. He walked the perimeter twice each day, checking for tracks, for broken branches, for scents on the wind. Mira noticed the change, though he said nothing. She didn't need him to. Silence with Kael was a language of its own. One evening he returned with tension in his shoulders and blood on his sleeve. "You're hurt," she said, rising to meet him. "It's not mine," he answered, then handed her a small pouch of jerky. "We need to move tomorrow. Someone's been tracking us." Her stomach tightened. "How many?" "3, maybe 4. From the town? Or bounty men? Doesn't matter, they won't stop." She nodded. Fear no longer paralyzed her. It burned instead, steady and ready. She'd already died once in that square. What came next was only survival. They broke camp before first light. By noon they reached a ravine lined with thornbrush and black hucks. Kael led her into a hidden crevice behind a boulder. A narrow path carved into the wall like a wound in the stone. "They'll have to come down single file," he murmured, placing his rifle across his lap. Mira stood beside him, holding a small pistol he had pressed into her palm that morning. It was cold, heavy, real. "You remember how I showed you?" he asked. She nodded. "When you see eyes, don't wait." They didn't speak again. The first man came at dusk, a scout with a red bandana and cocky boots that crunched too loud on the gravel. He didn't see Kael until it was too late. One shot, clean. The second charged in fast, rage in his chest, and a shotgun in hand. Kael rolled and fired again, but the man didn't drop. Mira saw the flash of metal, the blast of smoke, and Kael stumbled backward, blood blooming at his side. The man raised his shotgun again. She didn't think. Her hands rose. The pistol one pull, the shot cracked across the ravine like thunder. The man jerked, dropped his weapon, and fell hard, kicking dust into the air. Kael, breath shallow, leaned against the wall. "You didn't wait. You acted when it mattered." She dropped the pistol, ran to him, pressed her hands to his bleeding ribs. "I told you," she said, choking on adrenaline. "I'm done being quiet." He tried to smile, failed. "Remind me not to teach you too well." They laughed, breathless and broken. But the danger wasn't over. The last 2 men came shortly, after slower, more cautious. They found their companions' bodies and paused. Mira helped Kael to his feet. He refused to let her carry him, but she stayed close. They climbed out the back of the ravine, using roots and rock as ladders. Night fell fast, and with it came cover, and more pain. By midnight they reached a small spring hidden under a ridge. Kael collapsed near the water. Mira tore open his shirt, cleaned the wound, and bound it as he had done for her. "You'll live," she whispered, though her hands trembled. "Damn shame," he rasped. She laid beside him, eyes open to the stars. She had taken a life, not to save herself, but to protect someone who had once carried her away from death without asking her name. She didn't cry. She didn't break. She wasn't a girl in pain anymore. She was someone who had learned to hold fire. She was his equal in fire now, and together they would burn through whatever came next. 3 days passed before Kael could walk without wincing. His wound festered with the desert heat, but Mira nursed it with herbs and patience. She crushed leaves she remembered from her mother's, pouched and whispered words that had no meaning but felt like medicine. She refused to let him die, not after all they had survived. They moved slowly, trading distance for secrecy. The land around them grew harsher, emptier. No trees, no shade, just rocks that crumbled underfoot and hills that watched them like sentinels. Then one morning, Kael stopped at a rise and pointed. There, below, nestled in a dry valley, were the scattered bones of a village, crumbled adobe walls, fire-blackened posts, and the remains of a well choked with weeds. The wind moved through it like a ghost, looking for its name. Mira stared. "This was your home, one of them," he said. They descended carefully. The earth beneath their boots felt sacred and spoiled all at once. Inside what remained of a long house, Kael sat in the dust and pulled a weathered pouch from beneath a stone. Inside, 2 eagle feathers, a tiny carved horse, and a child's beaded bracelet, faded but intact. He held it gently like something still alive. "She was 5 when she made this," he said. Mira crouched beside him, careful not to interrupt. "I buried my wife under that tree," he said, pointing to a gnarled mesquite stump, "and my daughter beside her." Mira's breath caught. "She died of fever. We asked for help. The army refused, said they didn't treat half-breeds." "I'm sorry," she whispered. Kael's eyes darkened. "They said we could stay, that we'd be safe. They brought food for 2 winters. Then one spring, they didn't come. Soldiers came instead." He closed his hand around the bracelet. "They burned it all, said it was necessary, called it progress." Mira touched his arm. "And you survived." He looked at her. "I didn't want to." She didn't speak. There was nothing to say. They spent the night there. No fire, just the warmth of each other's presence. Mira laid her head on his chest, and he wrapped his good arm around her. "Do you regret saving me?" she asked in the dark. "No," he said, "even with the blood on our hands. I've lived with blood for years. Yours is the first that mattered." She closed her eyes. Her back still ached. The scars would never fade, but neither would this night. The truth between them, raw and unspoken. By morning she awoke to the smell of whetstone. A light rain had come, soft and unexpected. The sky, once harsh and unforgiving, wept quietly over the ruins. They stood together in the gray dawn, the wind pressing their clothes against their skin. "We can't stay here," she said. "No," he agreed, "but we can leave something behind." Together they buried the bracelet beneath the mesquite. Kael sang something low, a morning song, broken and rough, but filled with memory. Mira didn't understand the words, but she felt them in her ribs. As they walked away, hand in hand, Mira looked back once, not to mourn, but to remember. They were not just fugitives anymore. They were the last breath of a world, erased, and the first step of something new. They were asleep when the dogs came. The warning bark echoed just once before the cave filled with shouting. Kael shot up, hand going for his rifle, but boots were already stomping inside. Light from torches splashed the walls. Men swarmed like ants through the narrow entrance. "Don't move," someone shouted. "Hands up." Mira reached for Kael, but a boot caught her ribs, knocking her back. A blow to Kael's temple brought him down hard. Blood followed. The world spun. When she came to, her wrists were bound and her mouth dry as bone. The sun was high again, always watching, always cruel. They were in a wagon now, bumping down a dirt road. St. Roch's steeple pierced the horizon like a dagger. The men spoke freely around them. "Sheriff will be glad," said the preachers. "Been asking for justice." "She shot a man. He was local. He was scum," one muttered. "Still white." Mira said nothing. Her eyes locked on Kael's. He was bruised but conscious, silent as always. But there was something different now. Not fear, resolve. The town gathered before they even arrived. Word had spread like wildfire. The girl who fled, the Apache, outlaw who stole her, the death, the sin. They were dragged before the church again, wrists bound in front of the same steps where Mira had bled weeks ago. The pastor stood in his robes, the sheriff beside him. Miss Hargrave stepped forward, dressed in black, veil tight around her face. "That girl murdered a man in cold blood," she hissed. "And he," she pointed at Kael, "is wanted for killing a colonel's wife. He's a savage, a thief, a demon." The crowd murmured. "We'll hold a tribunal," the sheriff said. "It's the Christian way." Kael laughed, just once, low and bitter. Mira's eyes burned. She stepped forward, hands still tied. "I want to speak." The sheriff hesitated. "You're not." "I said I want to speak." The crowd quieted. Mira looked out at them. The same faces that had watched her bleed and done nothing. She felt her knees weaken but held firm. You beat me without trial. You called me thief, witch, less than human. All because my skin is darker, my voice softer, my mother different. No one moved. I was loyal. I served. I cleaned your floors. I prayed in your church. And still you turned your backs. Her voice rose. But he, she said, pointing to Kael, did what none of you dared. He picked me up. He didn't ask if I was guilty. He didn't care what blood ran in my veins. He saw me broken and lifted me. The pastor shifted uncomfortably. A few women looked down. I've seen more honor in a hunted man's silence than in all your hymns. She turned to the sheriff. So go ahead, judge us. But understand this. I'd rather die beside a man who sees me than live in a town that never did. Silence fell like a stone. Someone coughed. A child whimpered. An old man removed his hat. The sheriff scratched his beard. We'll reconvene at sunset. They were dragged away again. But this time the murmurs had changed. Whispers not of guilt but of shame. In their cell, Mira sat close to Kael, resting her head on his shoulder. Do you think they'll hang us? She asked. Maybe. Are you afraid? No. She smiled. Me neither. The cell was cold and smelled of rust and old sweat. Kael sat with his back to the wall, arms folded, while Mira lay curled on the wooden bench. They hadn't spoken for hours. There was nothing left to say. Outside, the town prepared its verdict. At sunset the church bells rang, not in celebration, not in mourning, in anticipation. The square filled again. Lanterns flickered. Faces, familiar and frightened, gathered to witness the final chapter of a story they had written without consent. The sheriff unlocked the door. Let's go. Mira stepped out first. Her spine was straight, her chin high. Kael followed, each step slow but steady. His wrists were still bound. A thin trail of blood from his reopened wound stained the ground behind him. He didn't flinch. They were led to the center of the square. This time no post, no whip, just a raised wooden platform. The pastor cleared his throat. We have deliberated. The crimes are grave. Deaths were involved. Laws were broken. Mrs. Hargrave stood at the edge of the crowd, trembling with satisfaction. But the pastor continued. We've heard testimony that calls into question the nature of those crimes, and we... A shot rang out. Chaos exploded. Screams pierced the dusk. Men dove for cover. The sheriff reached for his revolver. Too slow. A man burst through the crowd, gun raised. One of the bounty hunters who had tracked them. His face was flushed with rage. He pointed the barrel straight at Mira. You think you can walk away? He screamed. She killed my brother. Mira froze. Kael moved. In one motion, he threw himself in front of her. The bullet struck his chest. Time stopped. Mira caught him as he collapsed. Blood bloomed across his shirt, hot and fast. His eyes found hers, dazed but still burning. No, she whispered, pressing her hands to the wound. No, no, no. The sheriff fired twice. The bounty hunter dropped. The crowd recoiled, but the real drama had already happened. Mira sobbed, rocking Kael in her arms. You said you weren't afraid. He smiled faintly. Still not. You can't die. Not like this. Not now. His breath came slower. You were the only thing I saved. You saved more than me. The pastor stepped forward, hesitant. Let us help. Mira glared. Now. The old priest lowered his head. We all carry guilt, then carry him. Men rushed to lift Kael. He groaned but didn't resist. Mira followed close, hand in his eyes daring anyone to stop her. They took him to the church, the same place that had ignored her. Pain. Now it became a refuge. The town's doctor arrived. Bandages, morphine, murmured prayers. For hours there was only waiting. And when dawn broke, Kael opened his eyes. Alive. Mira wept again. This time not from grief. The sheriff visited that morning. He stood awkwardly at the door. We won't pursue you, he said. You're free to go. Mira didn't thank him. She only nodded. As the sheriff turned to leave, he paused. I don't know what to make of all this. You don't have to, she said. Just remember it. And he did. They all did. 6 weeks passed. The town of St. Roch tried to return to normal, but something had shifted. The pews at the church were quieter. The whispers in the general store were softer. Children still played in the square, but now they sometimes glanced toward the hills, as if expecting to see a black horse on the ridge. Mira and Kael did not stay. The morning after the sheriff released them, they rode west, not toward any town but toward the horizon, where nothing was promised and no one expected them. Kael was still weak, the bullet wound deep, but he held himself upright in the saddle. Mira stayed close, always one step behind or beside, never again below. They found a canyon nestled between mazes, where the wind sang through the stone, like a voice calling home. There they built something small, not a house, not a settlement, a beginning. A tent, later replaced by adobe walls. Mira molded herself with Kael's help. Day by day, they worked. No blueprints, no written plans, just hands, earth and stubbornness. Soon others came, a widow with 2 children, a man with scars across his face who never spoke, a boy with eyes too old for his years. Word had traveled. There was a place, quiet, unclaimed, where the unwanted might plant something and not be burned for it. They never called it a town. They had no sheriff, no church, no judge. But there was food, fire, laughter and work, plenty of it. One evening, Mira stood outside their home, watching the sun bleed gold across the rocks. Kael stepped beside her, his arm now strong enough to hold a tool all day. He had carved a wooden bird, small, rough, but proud, and placed it on the post by their door. She rested her head against his shoulder. "Do you ever miss it? The old world?" he asked. "The one that never wanted us?" He shook his head. "It never saw us." A child's laugh rang out behind them. The widow's daughter barefoot chased a chicken around the yard. Mira smiled. "They'll write stories about us, maybe." "No," Kael said, slipping his hand into hers. "They'll write stories about themselves, because we lived." One night, as they lay in bed, the girl, the widow's daughter, knocked softly on the door. She held a small drawing. Mira with a braid, Kael with feathers in his hair, a house behind them. "Are you married?" she asked, eyes wide. Mira chuckled. "More than that." The girl tilted her head. "What's more than married?" Kael crouched beside her. "When you choose someone, and keep choosing them, even when it's hard." The girl nodded solemnly, then ran off to show her mother. They sat outside until the stars came. The desert, once a place of exile, now whispered lullabies through the wind. Mira looked up at him. "You still think we belong to no place?" He kissed her hand, a soft, deliberate gesture. "We belong to each other," he said, and that was enough. Sometimes the world breaks those who never had a chance to begin with. But even in the harshest places, in towns that forget, in deserts that burn, in hearts covered in scars, there's a chance for something deeper: dignity, redemption, and a love that asks for nothing but truth. Mira and Kael didn't belong to any place, but in each other, they found something rare, something stronger than blood, lore or shame. A quiet defiance against the roles the world tried to assign them. What about you? Have you ever felt like you didn't belong until someone truly saw you? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. What part of this story stayed with you the most? We'd love to read your reflection. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories.